Welcome back. Now we're looking at Kant's categorical imperative and moral law. Now, as we discussed before, he introduces things like hypothetical versus categorical imperatives that guide behavior. Now, let's start. Practical principles, maxims versus practical laws. Now, he defines two things, one of them being maxims, which are subjective conditions, and the other one being practical laws, which are objective conditions. Now, to sum it all up, maxims are valid only for an individual's own will. So, for example, a maxim could be a personal rule not to tolerate any unavenged offense. They are tied directly to the faculty of desire and cannot become universal laws, because as we spoke about before, the whole thing of Kant is that if you believe a certain action is true or is moral, then it should be generalizable to the whole public or the whole universe. But since these maxims are only for your own good or only for your own will, then they can never be universal laws. And there is a formula for maxims that are not actually defined, but to separate a maxim from a normal action, we can look at it like this. A maxim is the intention plus the action plus the reason for why you do something. That results in the maxim. Whereas practical laws are objective. So these are the objective conditions recognized as valid for the will of every rational being. These laws form the basis of imperatives. To sum up, maxims are only for your own good. Practical laws are laws that work on everyone. So hypothetical versus categorical imperatives, what are they? Hypothetical imperatives are conditional commands for achieving specific desired goals. If you want to do this, then you ought to do something like this. So they're conditional commands. They provide instructions for achieving specific desired goals, and they represent heteronomous actions. What is heteronomous actions? They are actions following the laws of another or are driven by external desires. There's a weird bug flying around. So an example would be working and saving in your youth so that you have money in your old age. This stems from an external desire, which is having money or being rich at an old age. Therefore, this is a hypothetical imperative. It's a, if you do this, then you will do this. But categorical imperatives are absolute commands formulated simply as you ought to do A. So the reason Kant is doing a sort of difference like that is to distinguish between normal things and laws, basically, because he wants to reiterate the point or just make the point that laws are absolutely, objectively, should be followed everywhere and constant. He differentiates these two things. He wants to tell you that the laws must be followed no matter what. So there is no, if this happens, then you must do this. No, this is for regular actions. But for moral laws, there is no if or but. There is do. You ought to do this. They apply on everyone, and they must be followed regardless of one's personal goals or desires. And this forms a fundamental principle of Kant's moral ethics. It represents autonomous, self-ruled behavior. Now, let's establish a categorical imperative. What is his moral framework? He establishes three fundamental foundational theorems. Number one is all practical principles that presuppose an object of desire are empirical. What is this? Let's lead further. Because actions driven by pleasure or pain depend on subjective conditions, they are merely maxims and can never be universal practical laws. Now, what did we speak about? We spoke about maxims. What were they? They were things that were only valid for an individual's own will. So, all practical principles that presuppose an object of desire are empirical. Now, the presupposition of an object of desire means that you are trying to reach something. You desire something, therefore, you must do something. And this brings you to a hypothetical imperative instead of a categorical imperative, which makes it and not a law. You see? So the reason he calls them empirical is because he believes, as I explained in the previous lecture, there are two realms. The first realm in which your body resides, phenomena resides, something you can measure, physics, etc. And the second realm, which only your mind resides in. We can split these two into the rational realm and the empirical realm, in which the empirical realm, you have your emotions, you have your feelings, you have your things, things that are happening to me. For example, I'm itchy right now. These are all happening in the physical realm. But in the brain realm, in the realm of reason, none of these things are happening. Therefore, I'm completely detached from my own benefits. I can think purely logically. So, let's go in. Theorem 2. All material practical principles relate to self-love and one's own happiness. Practical principles, what does this mean? Empirical stuff. Relate to one's own happiness. These belong to the lower faculty of desire rather than pure reason. Pure reason determines the will directly through the formality of a practical rule without relying on feelings of pleasure. Now, initially, when you want to do anything, the reason you want to do it is because your emotions tell you to do so. For example, I want to drink some water. Why? Because I feel thirsty. But when I strip away the feelings of pleasure that I will get from water, what do I get? I get the formality of drinking water. What is the formality of drinking water? It's to quench my thirst, which is necessary to, hydrate my body and keep on living. So you strip away all of the emotions that are tied to your actions so you can reach the actual form of the thing that you're trying to evaluate. Maybe you're evaluating stealing. If at the time you feel like stealing and you really desire whatever something is, I really want this cake, but I don't have money, so, I can maybe do it. But if I strip away from my emotions and think only with my brain, only in the other realm, which is devoid of the existence I have here, devoid of my desires, I can say that, yes, stealing would be chaos. Theorem 3. For a rational being to think of their maxims as universal laws. So, to think of your own actions as universal laws, they must rely on the mere form of the law. As we discussed before, you must look at the underlying logic of the law that you are trying to evaluate and strip away all empirical material desires so they are devoid of your own emotions and rely purely on logic. That's the thing. So, freedom, rationality, and morality. Kant's moral philosophy is deeply tied to the concepts of human freedom and reason. The formal ground that determines the will is entirely independent of the natural laws of cause and effect, as we spoke about. This independence from natural causality is what Kant calls freedom, which explains the free will paradox that we talked about earlier. So, freedom is the independence of your will, basically. Freedom and moral law imply each other. What does that mean? Freedom is the ratio essendi, so the reason for being of the moral law, while the moral law is the ratio cognoscendi of our freedom. This basically means you have freedom to, you have moral laws because you are free. You have freedom. And moral law is the proof that you have freedom. Does it make sense? Freedom proves the moral law, whilst also being the reason for a moral law to even exist. Without reason, humans would simply be slaves to their passions, and therefore not free. Because you are tied to something. You are hetero something. I forgot the actual terminology. Heterogeneous something. Not free. Because morality cannot exist without freedom. It ultimately means that without reason, there is no morality. Look, we are using, what was it? Abductio absurdum something. Wait, I'm gonna look it up. Reductio ad absurdum. We are using that right now. We are thinking about the thing we are doing not being true, or the exact opposite of it being true, so we can prove the other thing. So you're thinking to prove we have reason. We can see that without reason, humans would be simply slaves to their passions and therefore not free, because morality cannot exist without freedom. It ultimately means that without reason, there is no morality. And it also proves reason exists, I guess. So let's look into the fundamental law of pure practical reason. He summarizes his ethical doctrine with the fundamental law. So act that the maxim of your will could always hold at the same time as the principle giving universal law. This just means whatever you do, make sure it aligns with the universal laws. If you want your shit to become a universal law, then it should abide by the rules of universal laws. To give a practical example, two people leave a bar drunk and decide to drive home in different directions. And what happens? One of the friends goes home, hugs his wife and kids, both of them are fucking drunk. They're flying high as a kite. But one of them reaches his wife and kids. Oh, hi, honey. How was work? Thank you. Blabbering mess because he's drunk, I guess. But the other friend was not so lucky. The other friend resulted in a tragic outcome. He died due to a tragic collision. So, the underlying maxim for both individuals was you may drive home even if you are drunk. I mean, this is the core belief that they held. If they didn't, they wouldn't act like that. So, even though the first driver arrived home without incident due to mere luck, their action is still morally wrong because the guiding maxim is incorrect. And the reason we can see that the guiding maxim is incorrect is because the second driver causes a tragic death because they followed the same incorrect maxim. Morality is determined by the universal validity of the maxim, not by lucky or tragic consequences. Just by it works, just for you, in that specific case, does not make it a universal law. It has to be applicable in every case whatsoever, whatever happens. And that's it.